Star Council, jury instruction 275. It's not a generic one. So both of you would look at it tonight and start filling in some of the blanks.
I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you may be seated. May I call your witness?
The state's next witness is Richard Hawkins.
Can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony about to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Could you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Richard Lewis Hawkins. Hawkins.
And how old are you, Mr. Hawkins?
56. I'll be 57 July 19.
Mr. Hawkins, do you know a person by the name of Kristopher Torgerson?
Yes.
And is the person that you know to be Kristopher Torgerson here in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Just so we can all make sure we're talking about the same person, can you point to where he's sitting and tell me what color shirt he's wearing?
It's like a burgundish.
And ask the record to reflect he's pointing to the defendant, Chris Torgerson. Mr. Hawkins, how do you know Chris Torgerson? I should actually ask that a little more narrowly. Do you remember when you met him?
Yes. This was it was like maybe 12, 13 years ago.
So maybe like 2002 timeframe?
Yes.
Or actually, no, that's not the right math at all. 2004 or 5?
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that.
And where were you living back when you met Mr. Torgerson?
I was living in Dayville, Alabama.
Did you call Mr. Torgerson Chris or Christopher or something else?
Chris.
Was Chris also living in Alabama back then?
Yes.
And at some point in time, did Chris come down to Alabama when he was living in Wisconsin and see you?
Yes.
And do you remember when that was?
Okay. I want to get the.
If you don't know, that's okay. Just if you have an idea of about
Okay.
when that was, let us know.
I can't really just say what day it was.
Okay, was it before October of 2010?
Yes.
Do you know if it was a few months before that, a year before that, something else?
It was, I think, maybe a month before that.
Okay. So in 2010.
Yes.
When Mr. Torgerson, or when Chris came down to Alabama, did he bring anyone with him?
Yes.
Who was with him?
He brought his girlfriend, Andrea.
Andrea Widinsky?
Yes.
And at that time in your life, were you working?
No.
Were you looking for work?
Yes.
Were you having a hard time finding a job?
Yes.
Were you married at the time?
No. I was divorced.
And did Chris and Andrea invite you to come back to Wisconsin with them?
Yes.
And if you remember, how did the three of you get from Alabama back to Wisconsin?
Okay, we rolled back in Andrea's van.
Once you got, well, I should say, did you at some point in time end up arriving back here in Wausau?
Yes.
And when you got to Wausau, what were the living arrangements like? Where would you stay?
I would stay at Chris's apartment.
And when you were staying at Chris's apartment, did Andrea and Chris stay there also, or did they stay somewhere else?
Well, Andrea had her own apartment at the time.
So would she stay at her place?
Yes, she would stay at her place, and then she was like back and forth. She would come over and visit Chris, and I would stay at her apartment too.
So did Chris and Andrea always spend their nights together?
Yes.
And then, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, would you stay wherever
At
Chris and
Chris's
Andrea?
apartment.
Okay. So you'd stay wherever they weren't?
Right.
Okay. But you're saying Chris's apartment?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you got to Wausau, did you have a car to drive?
No.
How did you get around?
Well, Chris, somehow he had a bike. I guess one of his friends gave him a bike, or Andrea's bike or something. And I would ride the bike around back and forth from his apartment to her apartment.
And were you looking for work while you were here?
No.
What were you doing for money and food, stuff like
Well,
that?
I didn't have any money. At the time, Chris would supply food at the apartment for me.
Would Andrea cook for you and help take care
Yes,
of you?
yes, I ate at her place too.
Okay. And just so we're careful, the court reporter is the lady sitting right in front of you, and she's
Okay.
writing everything down.
Okay.
So we have to make sure we don't talk at the same time. I'll be more careful too. And you said you didn't have any money. Did you have a phone?
Yes.
Did you know anyone here in Wausau
No.
besides Chris and Andrea?
No.
Did you have any family or friends here at all?
No.
Had you ever been to Wausau before?
No.
Did anyone know you were here?
My friend who I was staying with, Darryl Pearson.
So the time, I'm going to direct your attention to October 9th of 2010. Do you remember that day pretty clearly?
Yes.
Was that kind of a hard day for you?
Yes.
I'd like to start earlier in the day on that day. If I told you that that was a Saturday, would that sound right?
Yes.
Were you spending some time with Chris that day?
Yes.
And do you remember what time on October 9th that you and Chris got together?
It was early, I'll say about 10 o'clock.
In the morning?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a plan for the day, or were you just going to hang out?
Well, it was more like we was going to hang out that day.
Do you remember if Chris was working at that time?
No.
What did he do for money, if you know?
Well, I really didn't know.
Now, were you spending, from the time that you were in Wausau, were you spending every day with Chris?
Yes and no. Because majority of the time I would stay at his place, and like I would visit Andrea and I would stay over her place too. So it was like back and forth.
Okay. When the time that you did spend with Chris, was he a pretty heavy drinker?
Yes.
And not based on what people told you, but just what you saw with your own eyes. Did you were you aware that he was heavily using drugs?
No.
If he did do it, it wasn't in front of you?
No.
And again, I started to mention October 9th, and you said that you and Chris got together maybe around like 10 o'clock that morning.
Yes.
What did the two of you do starting at 10 o'clock in the morning to the best of your memory?
Okay, first thing, he came by his apartment, picked me up, and he said we was gonna hang out. And I said, okay,
And that was around 10 o'clock that morning?
yes.
When he picked you up, do you remember if he was in a Jeep or a van or something else?
He was in his Jeep.
Okay. And you knew the Jeep to be the vehicle that he drove, that was his?
Yes, green Jeep, yes.
And do you remember what vehicle, if any, around that October of 2010 timeframe that Andrea drove?
It was a minivan.
Do you remember what color?
I like gray,
And if you remember, what color was the Jeep?
green.
Okay, so he picks you up at around 10 a.m. and says, let's go.
Mhm.
Where did you go, if you remember?
Okay. First, we went to, it was a bar right below Andrea's apartment, down the street.
Okay. Now, you had said earlier that Andrea had a place of her own. Was that an apartment or a condo?
Yes, it was an apartment.
And do you remember the name of the bar that was beneath that apartment, if you know if that's okay?
I can't remember the name.
And when you say beneath, are you saying that Andrea's apartment is on a second floor and it's directly below it, or it's down the
No,
road?
it's a lower level.
A lower level, okay. So if you remember, about how much time do you think the two of you spent at that bar?
I'd say an hour.
Were you keeping track of how much you were drinking and how much Chris was drinking, or not really?
Well, no,
At some point in time, did the two of you decide to leave that bar?
yes,
Did you go to another bar?
yes.
Okay. And I'm not going to go through every bar. How many bars do you think you went to during the day that day?
I'd say maybe 4 or 5.
And at those 4 or 5 bars, when you would leave one bar and go to another, would you drive or would you walk?
We will drive to different bars.
And Chris was always driving?
Yes.
At some point in time, I'm guessing it started to get a little bit late.
Yes.
And in the evening hours, did you and Chris end up arriving at the breakaway bar?
Yes.
Do you know about what time frame you and Chris were at that bar?
I'd say maybe 8 or 9 o'clock.
Throughout the course of the day, do you have any idea about how much you had to drink or about how much Chris had to drink?
I'd say myself, maybe 6 or 7 beers.
And did you have any idea how many Chris had?
No, because majority of the time when we was together, I would like maybe sit at the bar or, just be by myself, and he would casually, move around. But I really didn't know, how much he had drank.
Okay. When you would be at these bars, did it seem like Chris knew a lot of people?
Yes.
Did the two of you spend a long time at the breakaway?
Yes, I'll say maybe an hour or 2.
So if you got there at 9 o'clock, you would have been there till at least 10 or 11
Yeah,
p.m.?
about 10 or 11.
At some point in time after the breakaway, well, I should say this, was the breakaway the last bar that you went to?
Yes, I think it was.
Were you getting tired after the breakaway?
Yes,
Did you want to go home?
yes,
And did you ask Chris to take you home?
yes,
Did he?
yes, it did.
Which, and home might be kind of a strange term, but which apartment, at least based on your recollection, did he take you
He
to?
took me to Andrea's apartment.
Was Andrea there?
No,
Did you have personal knowledge of where she was, or was she just?
yes, because Chris told me that she,
I'm going to stop you. We don't, it's just a courtroom. We can't talk about what other people told us.
Okay.
It's only what you saw with your own eyes.
yes, well, I didn't see her at her apartment,
Okay. But that was just your understanding.
yes.
When, did Chris stay with you at that apartment?
No,
Did he indicate to you where he was going?
no,
And at this point, was he still driving around in the Jeep?
yes.
Kind of on a side note, during the time that you were staying there with Chris, did he ever drive the van?
Yes.
Did he have a key to it, if you know?
I really didn't know.
So do you remember, and I know we said that you left the bar maybe around 10 or 11 p.m. How far, if you remember, was the bar to the place till when you got back to Andrea's apartment?
I'd say maybe 2 or 3 miles.
They're pretty close.
Yes,
So when you got back to Andrea's apartment, it wouldn't have been too much after the 10 or 11 time.
no,
Did Chris just drop you off, or?
yes.
Okay. He didn't come inside?
No. If I would, that's, when he dropped me off, she has, well, Chris had a key there that I could use to get in her apartment.
Okay. So that's how you would get inside?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. And was your intention to just go to sleep at that point?
yes,
And did you?
yes,
Now, at some point in time later, did you wake up to something?
yes.
Do you know how much time had passed till the time that you woke up? If you know.
Maybe 2 hours. Yes.
So if you had been dropped off 10 or 11 or somewhat thereafter, it might have been sometime around 12 or 1?
Yes,
Was it still dark out?
yes.
What woke you up, if you remember?
Well, woke me up. Chris entered the apartment and he woke me up. He said, "Richard, get up." I said, "Chris, what is it?" He said, "Get up." I asked him again. I said, "What is it?" He said, "I want you to get up." So I got up and he handed me a coat out the closet and we left out the door.
Okay. And he didn't tell you where you were going?
No.
When he picked you up that time later in the night, was he still driving the Jeep or the van or something else? If you remember.
Okay, at that time, he was driving Andrea's, and where he was using both of them, the Jeep and her van too.
On that night?
Yes,
Let's talk about that a little bit. You had indicated that when you were driving around from the bars that he had the Jeep.
yes,
And at this point in time, when he comes to get you, he has Andrea's van?
yes.
Okay.
Well, he was like swapping out, you know.
At some point in time, the two of you arrive at a destination.
Yes.
And about how long, if you remember, were the two of you in the car before you got to where you were going?
I say maybe 5, no longer than 10 minutes.
So it was close.
Yes.
Had Chris said anything to you in the car
No, he was quiet.
When you got to your destination, was it somewhere you had ever been before?
Yes.
Now, you don't know the layout of Wausau very well, is that a fair
No.
statement?
No, I don't.
Okay. So, did you know the address of where you were?
No, I didn't know the address.
Had you met a person or people that lived at this same place that you arrived?
Yes.
Who did you know to live in this place that you arrived?
I remember her, the girl that stayed there, and her boyfriend. I met them before.
Okay, do you remember the girl's name?
I don't remember, I didn't remember her name.
Have you heard the name Stephanie
Yes.
Rose throughout the investigation?
Yes,
Was it her apartment?
yes,
Okay. Now, you said that you had been there, did you say once before or before?
yes, before.
Okay. And when you had been there once, or before, was it one time or something else?
It was one time.
Okay. And when you were there the one time before, do you remember who you were with?
I was with Chris.
And what had you and Chris been doing at Stephanie Lowe's residence the one time before?
Okay, when we went there the first time, her boyfriend and Chris, they was talking, and I think his name was Eric. And I really didn't, know them, and we sit there and we talked, and we left.
Okay. How long before this night, the October 10th of 2010 night, was the time that you're talking about that you were over there?
Okay, maybe a few weeks, maybe 3 weeks.
Okay, so at this point, you and Chris have arrived at what we understand to be the apartment of Stephanie Lowe and her boyfriend?
Yes.
Has Chris said anything to you about why you're there yet?
No.
What happens when you guys get there?
When we first arrived there, I gets out and Chris gets out and he goes upstairs. And what was surprising to me, Chris, he had a key to the apartment.
Did you ask him about why he had a key to
No.
the apartment? But to your knowledge, Chris was not in any kind of a relationship with this young woman, right?
No.
Okay. But he didn't have to break in, he had a key.
Yes.
And did the two of you go into the apartment?
Yes.
Who went in first, did you remember?
Chris went in first.
Does he have a key?
Yes.
Did you follow him?
Yes.
Were you asking him, what are we doing here?
Yes. I asked him when we first arrived there, I said, Chris, why are we going in their apartment? And he said, come on in, shut the door.
Didn't tell you any more than that?
No.
Did you follow him in?
Yes.
What happened next?
Okay, when I walked in, Chris walked in bedroom. And he mentioned to me, he said, come on back here.
Hold on, I'm going to stop you for 1 second. You said back here. Was the bedroom pretty far away from the door? The entry door?
No, it wasn't that far.
Continue.
And when I walked back, I noticed her laying across the bed, Stephanie.
And it was the same girl that you had seen at that apartment before?
Yes.
And when you say across the bed, you mean like from side to side?
Yes.
And was she, at that point in time that you saw her laying across the bed, was there bedding on the bed?
Yes.
Was Stephanie covered with anything at that point?
Yes.
What, if anything, was covering Stephanie?
It was covering her body, and the only thing I saw was her head and her face.
Did you say her head and her face?
Her head and her feet.
Oh, feet, thank you.
Yes.
What was covering her body, if you remember?
A blanket.
And did you notice anything specific about Stephanie's head area?
Yes.
What was that?
I saw blood on her. It was like on her neck, and it was on the blanket too.
Did you come inside the bedroom, or were you kind of looking from?
I was from the doorway.
And when you said that you saw blood on her neck, did you see blood anywhere else on her body?
No.
Did you get close enough to see where the blood was coming from, the injuries or anything like
No.
that? And I know this is probably a hard question. Were you able to tell from where you were standing if Stephanie was alive or dead?
She was dead.
How could you tell?
She was in a still position.
Did you ask Chris what happened?
Yes.
Use your words. What did you say to Chris?
I asked Chris, I said, what did you do? And he didn't answer me the first time. And I asked him again, I said, what did you do to her? And he replied, she didn't give me what I wanted.
Based on your knowledge of Chris, or maybe you asked him, please use your words, what did Chris tell you what he meant by didn't give me what I wanted?
No,
Did you know what he meant by that?
no.
Did you ask him any more questions when he said that she didn't give him what he wanted?
Yes.
What did you ask next?
I asked him, I said, why did you hurt her? And he replied, because he replied the same thing again. And he walked over to her and he threw the blanket over her. And when he did that, he replied to me, he said, come on in here. And I said, what did you want? He said, I want you to help me. And I replied, I said, I can't help you, man. I can't do this.
And when you said that you couldn't do this, what, if anything, did Chris say?
He said, you are in it now.
What did you take that to mean?
It was like I was part of what he just did.
Were you scared?
Yes.
So, did Chris tell you what his plan was as to what he should do next?
Yes.
What did he say?
He told me, he said, I need you to help me. And after he said that, I said, I can't help you. He said, you're in it with me now. And he threw the blanket over her and he pulled her off the bed.
And we've heard testimony that Stephanie was a petite girl, that she was short. Was he
Yes.
able to carry her by himself?
No.
Did you help him carry her?
Yes.
And again, I know this isn't easy to talk about, but how, how were the two of you positioned when you were carrying her?
Okay. I was in the doorway and Chris had threw the blanket over her. And he told me to get one end of the blanket and I picked one of the end of the blanket and we toted her out the room.
And I think we talked about this before, but this apartment, did you have to go up some stairs to get to it?
Yes.
And so, to get out, you'd have to go back down the stairs?
Yes,
So the two of you carried Stephanie downstairs?
yes,
When the two of you were carrying her, I know you said that Chris had covered her up with the blanket. Were the two of you carrying her the long way, like one of you had the top half and one of you had the bottom?
yes.
Do you know, even though she was covered in a blanket, if you had her head or her feet?
I think I had her feet.
Were you going out of the apartment first or second?
Yes, first.
So were you opening the doors?
Yes,
And when, at some point in time, did the two of you go outside?
yes,
Before you left, well, let me back up a little bit. When you had said that Chris had wrapped Stephanie in the blanket, when you took her out of the room, was there any bedding still left on the bed?
no,
So he had wrapped Stephanie completely in the bedding?
yes,
When you were inside of the apartment, did Chris do any cleaning while the two of you were there?
no,
When you were taking Stephanie out of the apartment, did you look back at the mattress that she had been laying on and see any stains on it?
no,
Did you smell any bleach or cleaning solution in the bedroom at that time?
no,
So getting back to the two of you taking Stephanie out of the apartment, when you left the apartment, do you remember if the lights inside the apartment had been on or off? That was kind of a bad question. Let's go back to when you arrived at the apartment. Do you remember if when you got there, the lights were off or on?
it was off.
They were off. Did Chris or you turn the lights on when you were there?
Yeah, Chris turned them on.
Okay.
Turn them what?
On,
Hey,
yes,
And when you left the apartment, do you remember if you or Chris turned the lights off?
I really don't know.
Okay, so at some point in time, you leave the apartment. Is there anything about the apartment that I haven't asked you that you really remember and think is important so far?
Well, on the bedding part, what we wrapped her up in, it was her pillows too, the bed pillows.
And those were all wrapped up
I
with
was
her?
all wrapped with her,
So when you left, there was nothing left on the bed?
you know.
When you got outside, did the two of you place Stephanie in the vehicle?
Yes,
And originally you had said that you had the van. Is that the vehicle that you had at that point?
no, we had his truck.
Oh, okay, I think maybe I misunderstood. So at this point in time, when he picked you up in those later hours, he had his Jeep?
Yes,
Okay. And that was the vehicle that he had the whole time while you were at the apartment?
yes,
Okay. So when you get outside of the apartment, the two of you placed Stephanie in the vehicle,
yes,
the Jeep?
yes. the Jeep.
How physically did that work? How did the two of you do that?
I opened up the back door on the passenger side,
Okay.
and when I opened it up, he placed her in first, and he went around the other side and pulled her inside his Jeep.
And do you remember, once the two of you placed Stephanie inside of the Jeep, if her head was behind the driver's side or the passenger side? If you know.
I really don't know.
And I didn't ask you this before, but do you remember where the Jeep was parked outside of Stephanie's apartment?
It was right beside her apartment.
So was it in a driveway or on the street?
Yes, in the driveway.
Okay. And I think you said this, but I just want to be clear, the driveway is right next to the building?
Yes.
When, once the two of you got Stephanie into the Jeep, and if I asked you this already, I'm sorry, do you remember if Chris locked the door behind the two of you?
The apartment door? I don't, he pulled it up, but I don't know if he locked it or not.
Okay. Where did the two of you go? Well, I should ask this. Did the two of you then leave the apartment?
Yes.
Where did you go?
We went to Andrea's apartment.
Had Chris said anything else to you from the last statement that he had made about not giving him what he wanted and then saying that you had to help him? Had he said anything else
No.
after that?
Because he could see that I was upset and I was shocked and I really didn't know what else to say.
So at this time, the two of you are quiet?
Yes.
Okay. And you said you went to Andrea's apartment?
Yes.
Did you know that Andrea had a boat?
Yes.
Once you got to Andrea's apartment, did Chris do anything with the boat at that point, or was that a different time?
Well, when we pulled up at the apartment, we pulled in front of the garage.
Okay.
And he opened the garage door. And when he opened the garage door, that's when he, picked the boat up and pulled it out.
Did you help him pull the boat out?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did the two of you do with the boat?
We hooked it on the back of his Jeep.
And had he said anything at this point about what he was doing with the boat or where you were going?
Yes.
What had he said to you about the boat or where you were going?
He said we was going up north.
Did you ask any questions?
Yes. I didn't know where I was going. He said up north, so I was wondering where was we going.
And at this point, Stephanie is still in the back seat?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't know if I made that clear. I think you said that when you were talking about placing Stephanie in the Jeep, that was the back seat, right?
Yes.
So the Jeep is hooked up. Do you know about what time it is at this point?
I'd say maybe like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Do you know about how long you two were at Stephanie's apartment?
I'll say it wasn't no longer than 5 minutes.
And had you, because you had said before that Chris woke you up, what you thought was maybe 12 to 1 a.m., and then if you weren't at Stephanie's for very long, and now it's 6 a.m., there's some time missing. What, if anything, were the two of you doing? Or do you think maybe it was later in the morning that Chris came to get you?
Well, I'll object to that as leading.
I don't
There are a
think.
number of alternatives given, so that I'll overrule the objection.
Go ahead, it is.
It might have been a little later than that.
And what made you think that at the time that the two of you were getting the boat hooked up, that it was about 6 a.m.?
Because the sun was coming up.
And so did the two of you end up going up north at that point?
Yes.
Now, at some point in time, Andrea kind of joined the circumstances, right?
Yes.
And how did, if you saw it with your own eyes, not what anybody told you, how did Andrea become involved?
We met her at the service station.
Do you remember the name of the service station?
No, I don't.
If you heard the name of the store, does that sound familiar?
I really can't say.
And at the time you met her, you're indicating the sun was coming up?
Yes.
And did you see what Andrea was driving?
She was driving her minivan.
Okay. Did you see or hear Chris talking to Andrea to get her to come to the service station?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not going to ask you what that conversation entailed, but your understanding was that she was to come meet you guys?
Yes.
And she did?
Yes.
Did she have anybody in the car with her?
Yes.
Who was with her?
The babies.
Andrea had a newborn, right?
Yes. And her son, too.
Did she have Mr. Torgerson's kids with her too?
Yes.
And did all of you fill up the vehicles with gas at that point?
Yes.
Were you outside of the vehicle, inside of the vehicle?
Outside.
Did you ever go inside the service station?
Yes.
Do you remember if you bought anything?
No, I didn't have any money, so I couldn't buy anything.
Do you remember who paid for the gas?
Andrea did. I think she paid it on a credit card, I believe. I'm not sure.
Do you remember Andrea throwing or handing anything to you at that service station?
Yes.
What did she throw you?
I think it was a T-shirt.
Do you remember anything noteworthy about the shirt?
Yes, the shirt had blood on it.
Did you see where Andrea had gotten the shirt?
No.
Did she say anything to you when she gave it to you?
No.
And do you remember if she tossed it or handed it to you or something else?
She tossed it to me.
Do you remember about how long all of you were at the service station?
It wasn't no longer than 10 minutes.
So we're getting into the sun coming up and all of you kind of get on the road?
Yes.
Who is in the front of, so there's two vehicles going?
Yes.
And who was in front?
Andrea.
Do you know why Andrea was in front?
She was more like leading us. You know, she was ahead. So we was following her.
At this point, I know you had said that Chris said you were going up north. At this point, did you know where up north you were going?
No.
Did you understand that, well, let me just figure out how to phrase this. Was Andrea the one that knew where you guys were supposed to be going?
Yes.
Were you aware that she had, or that her family had property up north?
No, I wasn't aware.
And so she's in the minivan in front, you and Chris are in the Jeep behind her?
Yes. In the book.
And the when all of you are driving at any point in time, did you and Chris make any stops along the way?
Yes.
Where did you stop?
It was at a service station, but I don't know what the name of the service station was.
And your recollection is that Andrea also stopped or did not stop?
No, because she was ahead. And while we was going up there, Chris was calling her to see where was she at.
Okay. Did the two of you and Chris, lose sight of Andrea when you stopped?
Yes.
If the two of you had just stopped for gas, what was your understanding of why you were stopping at a service station?
He wanted to get another beer.
Mr. Torgerson did?
Yes.
And did he get one?
Yes, he got 2.
He got one for you too?
Yes.
How long do you think it was the two of you were stopped at that service station?
Maybe 5 minutes.
Were you able to catch up to or find Andrea?
No.
How did Chris know where to go?
For my thought, he's been up there before.
Do you know about how long the two of you were in the car?
I'll say maybe an hour, hour and a half. It was a long distance.
And when you say an hour or an hour and a half, was that from the first service station to when you got there, or the
Yes.
second one?
From the first service station,
When you got to the cabin, was Andrea there?
yes.
And was the sun completely up at that point?
Yes.
And this is October 10th of 2010.
Yes.
So now we're into Sunday.
Yes.
When you arrived at the cabin, had you and Chris had any more conversations about Stephanie and what had happened?
No.
Were you aware as to whether or not Chris had, let me withdraw that, I'm sorry. When you got to the cabin and saw Andrea, did Chris ask for directions or help finding anything?
He asked directions to the hardware store.
And did Andrea either lead or direct or tell Chris how to
Yeah,
get?
she gave him directions to the hardware store.
So from the time that you got to the cabin, at some point in time, did you and Chris go to the hardware store?
Yes.
Did Andrea go with you?
No.
Okay. Did she stay at the cabin?
Yes.
Had you and Chris had any conversations about what the plan was at this point?
Yes. Chris mentioned that he was going to get a shovel at the hardware store.
Did he say why?
Yes.
What did he say?
To bury her.
And when you say her, you mean Stephanie?
Yes.
If you don't know, definitely let me know, but do you know if Andrea saw Stephanie in the back of the Jeep?
No, I don't think she did.
Did you hear Chris tell Andrea this?
No, I didn't hear it.
When the two of you went, well, I should say, did the two of you end up going to get a shovel?
Yes.
When the two of you went to do that, did Andrea, you said that she stayed back, did you know if she was planning on staying at the cabin or going home?
For my thought, she was going home because she had the baby, and the baby was crying, and I think she told Chris, I'm finna go back and take the babies home.
And you said that you went to the hardware store. Do you remember how long it took you to get to the hardware store from the cabin?
Oh, it wasn't that long, maybe 5-10 minutes.
Do you remember the name of the hardware store?
No.
How long, if you remember, did the two of you spend at the grocery, or I keep saying grocery, at the hardware store?
It wasn't long. No longer than 5 minutes.
Okay. So if you all left the service station, the first one, around or approximately 6, and it took a couple hours to get there, and then you go to the hardware store. Do you have any idea what time it is at the time that you're at the hardware store?
Maybe like 8 o'clock, maybe.
And if there was a receipt that said approximately 10, would that also sound okay to you?
Yes, probably, maybe.
And we'll hear about that later, but did you and Chris both go inside the hardware store?
Yes.
And what did you do when you got inside? Anything?
I was trailing him. I was walking behind him.
If you remember, did Chris ask for some help? Did you talk to anybody?
Yes, he asked where was the shovels was.
And did someone who worked at this hardware store direct you where to find them?
Yes.
And at some point, I think you said this, but the two of you purchased a shovel?
Yes. Where he purchased it. Yes.
And at this point, you still have the Jeep?
Yes.
Did the two of you head back to the cabin at that point?
Yes, we went back to the cabin, and Andrea, she was gone at that time, and we rode, pursued up in the woods.
When you went to the hardware store, did you still have the boat with you, or had you dropped that off?
No, we had dropped the boat off.
At the cabin?
Yes.
Okay, so you got back to the cabin area. I believe you noted that Andrea had left at that time. What happened next? What did the two of you do?
Okay. When we first got back at the cabin, we rode around. I didn't know where we was going, and we pursued down some roads, and I asked him where was we going. He said we got to dispose of the body. So we rode around, and I said we rode around at least 15, 20 minutes.
Now, you had said that you had stopped back at the cabin and Andrea was gone. Had you seen any other people at the cabin?
Yes.
Who had you seen, or did you know who was there?
Well, I didn't know who was there.
Okay, were they in vehicles, out of
No,
vehicles?
they was inside the cabin, I think.
Had you and Chris gone inside the cabin?
No,
How did you know they were there?
because Chris mentioned that he thinks someone's in there.
Okay, is that why you guys were driving around?
Yes.
When you said that you were driving around and Chris said something about having to dispose of the body, was Chris emotional or did he seem upset or sad?
He seemed like he was, like upset because, I think because he did it.
At some point in time, did Chris pull over to a spot?
Yes.
Did you have any idea where you were?
No.
Do you know how far you were from the cabin?
It was a good distance back from the cabin.
At that point in time, if somebody had asked you to lead them back to that spot from Wausau, would you have been able to?
No.
Once Chris pulled over at that spot, what did the two of you do then?
When we pulled up there, he backed in. And when he backed in, he got out first. And I got out. And he opened the back door on his side,
And when you say his side, you mean the driver's side?
the driver's side.
Okay.
And when he opened the door, he started pulling Stephanie's body out.
Pulling her out from the driver's side?
Yes.
And where were you at this point?
I was on the backside of the Jeep,
On the same side as Chris or the opposite side?
on the other side, the backside, on the opposite side.
Okay, so if Chris was on the driver's side pulling Stephanie out, you would have been on the passenger side?
Yes.
Okay. Were you behind the Jeep at this point?
Yes.
Okay. And what, if anything, were you doing to help Chris get Stephanie out of the car?
Okay. When he started pulling her out, he said, I need some help. You need to help me because you are part of this now.
Did you help him?
Yes.
What did you do to help him at that point?
I helped him pull her body out the car, out the van.
And where did you place Stephanie once she was out of the car? You and
On the ground.
What happened next? What did the two of you do?
Okay, he started walking in the woods, and he, started picking limbs up because limbs was all over the ground.
When you say limbs, do you mean like branches?
Branches, yes.
And you said he started walking in the woods. Were you following him?
Yes.
And about how far from the car, if you know, do you think the two of you walked into the woods?
Maybe 30 feet.
So not too far.
No.
At some point in time, did Chris stop at a particular spot? Correct?
Yes.
And what happened next? What did the two of you do?
Well, he started digging.
So he brought the shovel with him from the car?
Yes.
Continue.
And when he started digging, he mentioned to me that I need to help him move a rock out the way.
Are you able to give a description of the rock, like as to size? Was it very big?
Yes, it was real big.
And between the two of you, did you just have the one shovel?
Yes.
Was Chris the one doing the digging?
Yes.
And when, in comparison to the time of Chris digging in the woods, did he ask you to help him move the rock? Does that make sense?
Yes. He asked me to help him move the rock. And I walked over and helped him push the rock out the way.
So he wanted help getting the rock out of the way first?
Yes.
Okay. And that was before he started digging?
Yes.
Okay. And then once the rock was moved, he did the digging?
Yes.
How long do you think Chris was digging?
I'll say 30 minutes.
When Chris was digging, or before that, did anybody drive by?
Yes.
Did you know these people?
No.
Were you able to see what kind of vehicle it was?
No, I heard the vehicle coming. And Chris mentioned to me, get behind the truck.
Meaning his Jeep?
His Jeep, yes.
Did you do what he said?
Yes.
Did Chris hide out of the way as well?
Yes.
Where did he hide?
He hid back in the woods.
Did you ever see or hear that truck go by again?
No, it never came back by.
So did Chris continue and finish what he was doing?
Yes, he continued digging.
Okay. And at some point in time, did Chris finish digging what he was digging?
Yes.
And based on the shape and size of it, did you know what his intent was at that point?
Yes.
And did Chris say anything to you at that point in time as far as needing your help with Stephanie?
Yes.
What did he say?
He told me to come over and help him put her body in the grave.
Did you do that?
Yes.
And as you were carrying her, did did she still have all of the bedding and pillows with her?
Yes, all the pillows and bedding was on her.
Did you and Chris, let's just say first, did you help Chris and place Stephanie in that hole in the ground?
No, he placed her in.
Okay, and when she was placed in the ground, was all of the bedding and pillows with her?
No, he took the bedding off.
And did that remain for that point in time with the Jeep?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to see all of Stephanie at that point in time?
Yes, I saw her full body.
And do you remember, if you remember, do you remember what she was wearing?
I can't, only thing I remember, I saw a toe ring on her feet.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer.
I saw a toe ring
But the rest of her clothing?
was still on her.
Okay. When you said Kristopher placed her in the hole that he had dug,
Yes,
and I think you said this, but I just want to be clear, you had helped him carry her over?
yes,
Okay. Once she had been placed there, did Chris cover her?
yes.
And what did he do to cover her?
He covered her with the dirt.
And you mentioned before that he had been collecting some limbs. What did he do with those?
He put those on top of her too, limbs and dirt.
And did he place the rock on top of her as well?
Yes,
And did you help him with that?
yes.
At the time that you were, you and Chris were doing this to Stephanie, did you ever notice any knives or anything on her person or in her clothing?
No,
From the time that the two of you arrived with Stephanie at the site that was chosen to the time that you were completed, do you know about how long that was? If you know?
I really don't know.
Throughout the investigation, at one point, Mr. Torgerson had referred to you as Richard Millhouse. Have you ever used that name?
No. He, majority of the time, he would call me Rich.
When did Chris know your last name?
I think he knew my last name, but he didn't call me by my whole name. He just referred me as Rich.
When after the rock had been moved back to or on top of Stephanie, what did the two of you do?
After he put the rock back on her, he gathered all the blankets and the pillows and put those in the back of his Jeep.
And what happened next?
And I got inside, he got inside, and we left.
Did you stop back at the cabin?
No, we went straight out.
Straight back to
But we didn't go out the same way we came in.
Okay. Did you take a longer way or just a different way?
It was just a different way.
And did you go back to Wausau at that point?
Yes.
Okay. When you were on your way back, did you notice that Chris had a phone with him?
Yes.
Was it his phone?
No.
What, if anything, do you remember Chris doing with that phone?
He separated the phone.
What do you mean when you say
He
something?
broke it in half.
Do you know whose phone that was or where he got it?
I didn't know whose phone it was at that time.
Okay, now do you know whose phone it is?
Well, he mentioned it to me on the way back there.
Okay, whose phone did he say it was?
The girl,
Stephanie?
Stephanie's, yes.
If you remember as close to you can, as close to what you can remember, what did he say about the phone? Like, how did he tell you it was?
Well, he said that we got to get rid of the phone.
So when he broke the phone, what did he do with the pieces
He was separating, he's throwing them out the window.
while he was driving?
Yes.
And did he do anything else to get rid of any evidence on the way back from Wabino?
Yes.
What did he do?
We stopped at a dumpster on the way back, and he threw the sheets and the pillow in the
I know you had said that when you were at Stephanie's apartment that Chris had said she didn't give me what I wanted. Did he ever mention a safe or drugs or anything to you?
yes, later on.
When was that?
It was like the next day.
And before we get to that, once he dropped you off at his apartment, did you see him again that day?
No,
And if you can remember, what time the next day did you talk to him?
it was early in the morning, I'd say 9 or 10 o'clock.
Did he come over or did he come in?
Yes, he came over.
Okay, and you said that he mentioned drugs or a safe. What exactly did he say to you that next day?
He told me that they had a safe in her apartment, and he wanted to go back over to get the safe.
That on the day that he's talking to you, on October 11th,
That's the next day.
he still wanted to go back, or he was?
Yes.
So your understanding was that he had not gotten the safe?
Yes, my understanding.
Did he make any other reference to the safe or drugs or what was in the safe or why he wanted it?
No.
When you saw him the next day, did he indicate whether he had gone back and cleaned up or anything like that?
No, I didn't know.
Did he make any other comments to you about why he had gone to Stephanie's in the first place?
Well, his comment that that he wanted to go over there to get something, but I didn't know what.
Had he made comments to you throughout your time in Wausau about being broke and being tired of being broke?
Yes.
What exactly did he say to you?
He was saying that he was tired of being broken without money. And I told him that I didn't have any money either, and I was ready, I was ready to go back home. And he referred to me, he said that, he'll try to get me away back home.
So did he get you away back home?
Well, the way we got back home, me and him, we did a job together.
Okay, what kind of a job was that?
It was, we tore a barn down.
Was that like one of those cash for labor?
Yes.
Okay. And how long after Stephanie had been killed did you do that job with Chris?
Oh, I'd say maybe a week or two after.
I'm sorry, what?
Maybe 2 weeks.
And what you had originally said was a week or two after?
Yes.
Okay. And when, once the two of you had torn that barn down, at some point after that, did you get paid for your work?
Yes.
And as soon as you got paid, did you get a ticket to go somewhere?
Yes.
Who bought that ticket?
Well, the money that we both made together, we purchased the ticket
And where was that ticket for?
for California.
And about how long after Stephanie Lowe's murder did you go back to California? Or go to California, I should say.
Oh, it was, if I'm not mistaken, like 2 or 3 weeks after.
Did you want to leave?
Yes.
Did Chris want you to leave?
Yes. Because he mentioned it that, no one up here know me, and they wouldn't, they wouldn't figure out, who I was.
The last questions that I have for you is I know that we talked about that Chris told you that she wouldn't give him what he wanted, and then, you saw Stephanie there. Did he give you any specific information at any time as to how he killed her?
Yes.
First, when did he tell you that?
It was afterward.
And what did he say?
He said that he stabbed her in the neck.
Did he say, was that the only thing that he said, or did he say?
Yes.
Were you with Chris, or did he tell you that he cleaned the Jeep?
He mentioned it to me that he cleaned the Jeep.
Did he tell you that he did that because of what had happened with Stephanie?
Yes.
When the police first talked to you, is it safe to say that you were not honest for a long time?
Yes, I was scared.
Scared of Mr. Torgerson?
Yes.
Scared of what might happen to you?
Yes.
Have you been promised anything in exchange for your testimony today?
No.
Is everything that you're telling the jury the truth today?
Yes,
Do you feel bad about what happened?
yes. Not only her family. I feel bad about what happened to her.
I don't have any other questions for you, Mr. Hawkins.
We're going to adjourn for the evening tomorrow morning. We're going to start with cross-examination, so Mr. Hawkins will be back on the witness stand tomorrow. We'll start again at 8:30.
Yes, sir.
We'll just talk to the lawyers for instructions tomorrow morning. Okay, maybe seated. And we're done for the day. Start again tomorrow at 8:30, and I just had some questions about some of the instructions, so I'll just talk to the lawyers on that. We'll be off the record for it.